Okay, so this video was supposed to be a continuation of the last one and a deeper dive into the inherent issues with aiming for a process that is fair on average. But a big announcement came out from the IB on Monday, August 17th, that probably represents the closest thing that we're going to get to closure on this issue. I had a bunch more content planned, but I think it makes more sense to just look at recent events and maybe throw a few last things in there so that these videos can serve as a bit of a time capsule for the shenanigans that were the 2020 IB results. This video has a few elements, so here are the timestamps for each of them if you feel like skipping around. The case studies deals with some examples of grade assignment from the algorithm. Assign Those Marks is a play-at-home game where you can assign the marks for your very own 2020 cohort. Lingering Questions deals with some of the questions we still wonder about this algorithmic approach. And the rest is pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so here's the announcement. Following a ton of Category 3 appeals from schools, and also the Scottish exams and A-levels abandoning the marks that were generated from statistical models, the IB has announced conditions for some mark amendments. Basically, students who got predicted and IA marks that are close to each other will receive the higher of either their algorithmic score or their IA mark. In other words, many students will now be able to be marked exclusively on the actual work that they did. So it seems like those emails on Monday that looked like appeals decisions were really just results of this new policy. Here are a few examples from the IB website, and I'll throw the link in the video description. So here we are on ibo.org, and you can see it says no student will receive a lower grade than what was received previously, so this can't hurt you. And here are some examples. Here's a person whose predicted and IA grade were close to each other. Before, their final grade was 4, now it's going to be 5, just like their IA. Here's another one, 665. Well, those are close to each other, obviously, so we confirm the IA grade. And there's another example as well. So for all the students who petitioned and shared their stories, nice work. Your pressure helped make this happen. This isn't the outcome of deferring to predicteds that many students were hoping for, but for those students who were treated very poorly by the algorithm, there's at least the possibility of being graded on your own work. To the 700 schools who submitted appeals when results didn't make sense, you've clearly done well by your students. Many teachers are not paid over the summer, so the fact that you spent your summer filling out forms and gathering appeals data speaks to the level of commitment you've shown to your students. Since this is meant to be a bit of a time capsule, I'll throw in some examples of results that didn't make sense, but it's not like there's a shortage of them on the internet. To the IB, thank you for listening to your students' and teachers' concerns. It's unfortunate that this fix comes 6 weeks after the initial grade assignment, but late is usually better than never. And for me, getting messages from my students on Monday who were excited about their results was a welcome change from the land of despair that my institutional email account had become. Now, on August 19th, 2020, there's a bit of a sense that this is all over. But the question of whether this technique will come up again in the near future is a lingering concern. Predictive models have long been a part of the IA moderation process. But since the technique was a little simpler, and since they were relegated to the internal assessment's relatively low point value, the stakes were somewhat smaller. When it came to the 2020 Scottish exams, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon was pretty upfront and, I thought at least, summarized this whole process pretty well. I'm reading from a BBC article on August 10th, which I'll link in the video description, and it contains video of what I'm about to read. So First Minister Sturgeon said, "Our concern, which was to make sure the grades young people got were as valid as in any other year, perhaps led us to think too much about the overall system and not enough about the individual pupil. That has meant too many students feel they have lost out on grades they should have had, and that has happened not as a result of anything they have done, but a statistical model or algorithm. Despite our best intentions, I do acknowledge that we did not get this right, and I am sorry for that." She said her government would not, quote, dig our heels in and defend a position that in our hearts we know we didn't get right, and also we will not expect every student who has been downgraded to appeal. She ends with, "This is not the fault of students, and it should not be on students to fix it. That's on us, and we will set out how we intend to do that." Similarly, the IB is not requiring students to mount their own appeals in order to get the grade updates that were in Monday's announcement. It comes 6 weeks after the initial grades, but at least students need not apply for these results updates. The IB's message is a little less contrite compared to First Minister Sturgeon's, so let's take a look. So here we are on ibo.org, and you can see this message from the 17th of August 2020. We can scroll down a bit. So they say, "Putting the well-being of IB students and educators first in March, we canceled the written exams for DP and CP." And that's true, they really did put health first. Following the decision to cancel the examination, our assessment specialists, and so on, the awarding model used student coursework, school predicted grades, and school context for final grade awards. They make the point here that the school context was not based on previous cohorts' performance, but instead the relationship between predicted grade accuracy, performance in coursework versus examination components, and final outcome. I gotta be honest here though, if there's confusion about how this model works, that's really on the IB and their opaque messaging. As in our normal practice, IB assessment specialists talk about the number of examiners they have and the meetings. In this third paragraph, we're talking about how all the student work got marked rather than just moderating and sampling, aiming to maximize the confidence that every student will receive a fair mark overall. So this isn't new information, but it's still interesting that the IB was concerned that the sampling and regression techniques that are usually used with IAs wouldn't produce enough confidence in IA grades. And IA grades make up about 20 to 30% of most course grades. But a statistical model was okay for the majority of the mark. Of course, the fact that they marked all the IAs is probably the reason why these new mark adjustments are based solely on IAs. The whole bit about how IB generalized not from past performance, but the relationship between past predictions, IAs, and final grades for previous students, and then applied those models to current students is a good clarification. But it still doesn't deal with changes in who is predicting the marks or staff changes, in issues of small sample size, and in individual circumstances and performance. And we'll touch more on this later. But more than anything else, the sheer number of bizarre results speaks to the fact that whatever the process was, it wasn't fair enough for thousands of students. The fact that the preamble to the results updates contains a bit of a defense of the initial grades is a little unnerving. Getting it right even 90% of the time was never going to be a high enough bar when you're assigning hundreds of thousands of marks. I don't mean for this to sound snarky or malicious, but just factually, unlike First Minister Sturgeon's statement, there's no apology in here. And based on that, I would say that the door is still open to see some variation of this technique crop up in the future. So before we call it quits, let's take a trip down memory lane and look at some of the bizarre grade assignments that this process did produce. If you have your own stories, please feel free to share them in the comments below. So here's one Further Maths HL class at a school with foolishly good historical data. This initially came up on an IB teacher portal thread, which of course I would never share publicly. But later this teacher shared the same post in the comments section of a test.com article, along with the acknowledgement that he had posted it on the teacher portal. I'll link that article in the video description, and you can scroll through the comments if you want to find it. Now, just so everyone knows, Further Maths HL is the highest level math course the IB offers, and it's taken by about 1 in 400 IB math students, typically the strongest ones. If anyone deserves a good explanation of where their marks came from, it's probably these people. So you can see that previous years were all 7s except for 1 6 in pretty small classes. There's no IA for Further Maths, so the final grades are based exclusively on teacher predictions and how the algorithm amended them. So here's what happened. This person was predicted at a 7 and got a 7. This person was predicted at a 7 and got a 6. Incidentally, the teacher mentions that this is the best student that he has ever had. And this also points out how the A-Levels approach of ranking students might have been, at least in some respects, a touch more robust than the IB's simple request for predicted grades. This teacher asked for some sort of ranking system from the IB when submitting marks, but no such platform existed. This person, who was also predicted at a 7, got a 6 and missed their university offer. 2 of the people predicted at a 6 inexplicably got a 4, and the last one, even more inexplicably, got a 3. Did the process work well here? I don't know, but it seems a little odd to me. There's the impression that in creating a simulacrum of actual results, someone needed to get a 3, so it was this person. As a footnote to this story, since there's no IA in further maths, these students are unlikely to benefit from Monday's announcement. And I don't mention any of this as a dig, merely as a record of some of the things that happened in the summer of 2020 regarding these results. Another example comes from a student at a school with its first graduating cohort, and therefore without historical data to draw upon. The predicted marks were moderated downward, such that only 6 of the 17 students got their diploma. If you want to verify this comment, you can check out the top comment on Richard Rogers' quote, "scandal" video to see it. I'll link it below. I find this a little heartbreaking. I'm sure many schools have weak results in their first year, but they don't all. My school had some of its strongest results in year 1, and I struggle to see how historical data could confidently produce the results in this student's comment. Since the statement on Monday makes it clear that it's not past student performance, but rather the relationship between prediction, IAs, and final grades that drives the historical piece, I think it's worth taking a minute to look at just how uncompliant real-world data can be, especially when you're trying to generalize. I teach at a public school, and my students have scored anywhere from the high teens all the way up to 45. I've had students maintain their predictions, occasionally exceed them, and some just fall apart during exams. I make my predictions based on time-constrained mock exams, but sometimes it's hard to predict exactly who is going to stay focused through the preseason that is the April exam prep. Even when we try to use historical data appropriately, it can quickly become evident that school data can be messy. Correlations between predictions and final grades are not necessarily that strong because some students hold up well and some don't on exam day. So even if a class achieves, say, on average 1 point lower than their prediction, it doesn't mean that everyone, or even anyone, scored 1 point lower than predicted. Let's take a look at a completely made up but entirely plausible set of 2019 results. Okay, so here we've cooked up some plausible 2019 results. There are 8 students in this class. So Albus was predicted at a 5. He got a 3. What you should know about Albus is he stopped caring. He just wanted to focus on his band, and you'll be happy to know his band is doing great these days. Bellatrix really buckled down, and despite being predicted at a 3, ended up with a 4. Cho just missed her predicted 5. Draco was predicted at a weak 6 and ended up with a strong 4. Just had a bad day on exams. Eileen was predicted at a 7, and she knew very well that the IA wasn't worth that much, so she didn't work that hard on it. She knew that most of the marks would come from the exams, which she did well on. Fred was pretty solid. George was just shy of solid, and Harry, well, Harry's life just fell apart. And when someone deviates 3 or more from predicted, there's usually a story, and often it's a heartbreaking story that's tough to generalize from. So in Harry's case, he lost his godfather during exam period and could not focus at all. So despite being predicted at a 5, he ended up with a 2. On average, you might notice that students scored 1 point lower than predicted, though that varied a lot from student to student. And the correlation between predicted marks and final marks is about 0.55. Okay, now let's play the game of Assign That Mark. I'll throw a PDF in the video description if you want to print it off and play at home. Okay, so we know all this information about the 2019 results. Here's who's in the 2020 class. It's worth noting here that this is the same school. It's a different teacher, though. And we've got all these different people. So I'll just make it so that you can get it all on the screen. And if you want to pause, you can. Or if you want to play along with the PDF. I'm kind of interested in what Molly should get. Now, it's pretty tough to use those marks to reliably predict Molly's result with any kind of confidence, where it's fair and reliable enough to make admissions and scholarship decisions with. Do you use the fact that last year's predictions were off by an average of 1 and assign her a 4? Seems fair on average, but not necessarily to each individual. It means that no one in this class could possibly get a 7. Or do you prorate last year's distribution and say, like, Molly maybe is just this year's Harry, because that's 5 and 5, so she would get a 2. And so Nymphadora, I guess, might be this year's Cho, and then get a 4. But then again, since she's 5 and 4, maybe she's this year's Albus, and she should get a 3. But then why would Nymphadora get more than Molly? Or maybe they should just be marked on their actual work, right here. And that's what Monday's announcement tends towards for some students. Or do you take teacher predictions as is and just take this? And that's what the A-levels tended towards. Or do you take some combination of these approaches? Now, I can imagine comments here saying that these predictions in red are the real problem. And if they were closer to these final grades in yellow, then this would all work better. But that's really just complaining that the data doesn't conform well enough with the theory. The historical data is what it is, warts and all. The question is, what's the most defensible way to use it, if at all? Each approach has its pros and cons, but in the absence of actual student exams, I think there's a good case to be made for giving students the benefit of the doubt. Even after Monday's announcement, many students will still have their algorithmically produced score. And let's be clear that many students feel okay with that, and many do not. So I want to end this series with some of the questions that still remain. Here we go. What does the term vast historical data mean? How far back does it go when assigning grades for a single course? How does it work for schools with no historical data? What's the minimum class size for data to be considered valid for generating a model? How exactly does the algorithm work? Has it been vetted by university statistics departments? What is the margin of error and confidence level in results? Most importantly, if one used the algorithm to predict 2019 results based on this kind of historical data process, how often would it correctly predict individual course grades? Not the mean, but what proportion of students would be assigned the same grade as they earned? And I guess lastly, what grade should Molly get? Okay, that's pretty much it for me. Thanks to everyone who tuned into this series, and a special thanks to everyone who made noise around this issue. You, and let's face it, the outcry around other UK exams, are why we had Monday's announcement. I wish students, teachers, and IBO staff all the very best in the coming academic year. I've been critical of this year's grade assignment, but the IB did do a very noble and conscientious thing by canceling the exams. And it certainly caused them no end of grief. If you get nothing else from this experience, please know that the IB cares more about its students' health than their grades. And as COVID-19 continues to alter our lives, please take that message to heart. Your health is more important than your academics. So above all else, please stay safe, everyone. Oh my gosh, making these videos, it's really over. Now I can finally enjoy my summer. How many days do I have left?